Welcome to Generating Demand, real stories from the B2B trenches, where we tell you our secrets, like how to establish thought leadership or rock your webinar registrations, and tips and tricks to drive sales-ready leads. Lean in, listen, and learn. We've got you covered. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Intelligence Briefing.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Generating Demand, Stories from the B2B Trenches. I'm here today with Anna Leary, who is a marketing ops consultant. She's been doing this for over 6 years with a number of different B2B companies and servicing a number of different B2B companies as a consultant as well. And I'm super excited about this topic because, as we all know, marketing ops is at the heart of pretty much all demand generation, yes. All demand campaigns. And I have yet to have a good conversation around marketing ops and demand gen. So I'm so excited that you're here, Anna. Welcome.
Yeah, Amanda, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I love talking about marketing ops and how it ties to the different areas of marketing. So I'm excited to get more into that.
Yes, as a demand generation professional myself, I know that I heavily rely on marketing ops to help me execute campaigns, to help me measure campaigns, report on campaigns, to help me implement new technologies. Mm-hmm. There are so many new technologies from both a marketing perspective, but also from a sales perspective and understanding how to use those. Recently, Virtual Intelligence Briefing, who sponsors this podcast, we started working with a new technology that's actually here in Austin called Chronologic. And nice. My marketing ops person and I are, elbows deep in trying to understand how to make the most of that technology and service our sales and demand gen goals with it. So marketing ops is incredibly important to demand gen. Yes. And I understand you have a lot of little stories to tell us.
Oh, yes.
So I'm excited to hear them.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I actually, it's funny over the years getting so much different experience with various clients and, how they do their marketing. I feel like the little demand gen stories that I have as a marketing ops person have built up over time to help me learn different lessons of how am I going to do this better next time with the next client, or if this comes up again, what's a better way to handle this. And so I'm super excited that you're doing a podcast like this because I think, demand gen ties in to everything you do with marketing, but marketing ops also ties heavily to everything with marketing as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I bet as a consultant, you brought up something that I never really thought about. As a consultant, you get to see sort of the back end of a lot of different companies at a lot of different stages with a lot of different marketing problems that they're looking to marketing ops to help solve. So that gives you a really great perspective on best practices, probably, potentially even more so than someone that's at a company and has only worked in that one company or, maybe two companies, solving those one or two marketing problems. So
totally. And you get to see different companies and, the issues they have with resourcing and, you have people wearing many different hats. So that sometimes plays into some of the issues that you run into with the tie between demand gen and marketing ops as well.
Yeah. So you have a treasure trove, I'm sure. Yes. Of stories and things to share. So let's start with one. What's the first one?
Yeah. So I had a client that I worked with. It was a pretty large client, one of the bigger enterprise level clients that I worked with. Mm-hmm. But surprisingly, they actually had a really small marketing team, that covered demand gen and campaigns. They kind of covered it all. And so the problem with that was that we had a very ambitious marketing manager at the client who, signed himself up for various
big numbers.
Yes, big numbers, big goals, various tactics, very confusing methodology for how things were going to come in. And what made things even more complicated was this client had a very complicated scoring logic. And so you had to be aware of very tiny details about fields that tied into their scoring and how their scoring system worked. that then tied into Salesforce that then pushed them, to where they needed to go in their CRM. And
so let me back that up a little bit. So you brought up something. I too have worked with a number of companies and lead scoring and different lead models, and I feel like it's something that's sort of shifts in the wind a little bit, and even with one company, the marketing scoring can be too generous or it can be too strict. And so constantly iterating on, well, what is the right score and when do we flip it from lead to MQL or MQL to SQL, depending on how it's being used.
Right.
But you mentioned that your client was using fields to help dictate that score. And that's something really interesting, actually, that I'd like to at least point out to the audience of even being possible. It may be complicated from a marketing ops perspective, but if you're looking at geographies or titles or different fields, products in those lead records, then you can pull those into the lead models. Now, it sounds like it was complicated, but you're going to tell us how to do it in a way that works. Is that right?
Well, yes. So when I came onto the client, I first had to wrap my head around this complicated scoring logic because they had behavior scoring tied to product scoring that you had to meet a certain threshold based on a certain amount of behaviors plus, whatever product you were interested in, because obviously some products are more valuable at a company than others. And so that tied in heavily with their marketing tactics. And, when we had different campaigns, one that this marketing manager was really heavy on his budget was content syndication across various content syndication vendors. And so as a marketing ops person, when I hear, we have a new content syndication vendor, I'm like, oh no, here we go. Another API connection that we have to figure out how to set up and, making sure that the leads are coming through as expected. And so the problem that I've run into multiple times is that, content send, it might work initially when you're pushing, a few test leads through. When you get the heavier batches pushing through, if they're pushing through more at a time, that puts a heavy emphasis on your processing of your system. And so maybe they're not all coming through. And so we were consistently running into issues of the leads weren't coming through. We have to end up importing them and things like that. And, the biggest concern was they had so many AQLs they used because they were using a serious decisions type waterfall model. And so that tied heavily to how many they needed a certain amount of AQLs to make sure it was a successful campaign. And so when they're seeing no AQLs, obviously there's a problem that you have to figure out how to fix it quickly.
Now, for those people that are not familiar with the serious decisions campaign waterfall model, will you define an AQL?
So an AQL is an automation qualified lead. So basically it's someone that hasn't necessarily reached the MQL level or SQL level, but they're qualified by your automation tactics. And so a lot of companies have AQLs to start before they even note them as MQLs and then move them to sales accordingly, just based on their team structure on the sales side with marketing development reps and sales development reps.
And so an AQL is more than just a name in the database. That would be a lead.
Right, yes.
Or maybe a prospect. Some companies call it suspect. I call it a name in the database.
Yes.
And then an automated qualified lead, is that what you said? Automation qualified lead is basically a lead score, something that has someone who has engaged enough to have some points, but not enough to be an MQL. Is that right?
Yes. So this ties into that complicated scoring logic, because how you had to set up things to come into the system was making sure that they were stamping the correct values for these various fields that then gave them the correct amount of points to then meet that threshold for AQL and then push them over into the CRM for the rest of the processing. So
I see.
Yeah. So we had, various ways that we were trying to bring all of these content syndication leads into the system. And what we ended up doing was looking at a tool that could actually process them first before they pass them over to the marketing automation platform. And so that ended up being a lifesaver when it came to API connections and things like that, because then you're dealing with one API connection rather than 5 at the same time.
Yeah.
And so
what was that tool? Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, Converter. It's
Okay.
Convetter.
Okay.
Definitely a cool
I've not
tool.
heard of it, but yeah, I think the audience would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's similar to Integrate as well. I think you can do a similar thing with Integrate, which
I do know
more people have
Integrate.
probably heard of. But yeah, definitely makes you think about tools that can help save on efficiency and things like that.
That's great. So you had this sort of sophisticated, I'll call it highly sophisticated lead scoring model, and content syndication leads coming in batches. And then and it sounds like in the processing of those, a few fell out, or
most of them, I'd say.
Most of them fell out. Oh no.
Yeah, and
that's
so we're
not
trying
what
to
a demand gen wants to hear.
Right. And so, marketing ops definitely gets the pressure, especially as an outside consultant in addition to that. So, you're trying to figure out a way to make it better for your client, as well as making things a lot more efficient, which is what marketing ops is all about, because, we're always trying to do a million different things and do them a lot quicker than how we originally did them. And so that's probably an important part of working with your demand gen team and making sure those lines of communication are open so that you can figure that out together.
Yeah. Yeah. So, did you solve it? Did you figure out what happened?
Well, yeah.
And set it up correctly for the next one?
It was like an API issue. So it was basically too many API calls coming in at the same time, because it was a huge budget that this client had for content sends. They were getting a ton of leads pushed into the system at one time. So that's where the Converter tool comes in, because basically what happens is they're pushed into this one tool that makes sure all of the data is correct and that the data that you need is there. And then it pushes it into your marketing automation platform. So it made things a lot more efficient for us.
Nice. So that Converter tool acted sort of as the catch-all of all the different content syndication platforms and programs. And then it authenticated the data, maybe formatted the data, and then pushed it into the CRM system.
Yeah, it makes it like a middleware kind of.
Yeah. Nice.
Yes.
Good. Well, I've already learned something today, so that's awesome.
Yay.
Yeah. And in full transparency, Virtual Intelligence Briefing, who sponsors this podcast, does content syndication. And they have a lead guarantee, whatever our customers purchase. And they deliver leads in a shared Google Sheet that customers can then pull into their system. But it would be like a list upload versus an API.
Right. Yeah.
Although we do have some customers that ask us to drop it into Integrate, as or into their own formatted spreadsheets as well.
Very common. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. So that's a good story. You have any other stories for us?
Oh gosh. Well, I have like the nightmares.
Which one?
Yeah. Nightmares of connections not working. And you always hate that on the marketing ops side when, you've promised these great connections, you're like, oh, we'll do it with an API because I promise it's going to end up being better for lead routing. And then it fails and you have to figure out why it fails. And I've had that happen quite frequently with, different connections to LinkedIn lead gen forms, specifically with Marketo, which is the main marketing automation platform tool that I consult in. I'm always running into issues with a connection with a social network not working correctly. And I know that my teams that I've worked with previously have put a lot of emphasis on LinkedIn ads and things like that. And so that you hate, to mess up their campaigns because typically someone filling out a form on LinkedIn is probably a lot higher qualified maybe than a content send. And so you obviously want them going through the lead routing and lead processing instantly rather than having to figure out 5 days later, hey, they never came into our system.
Yeah, where's our leads? What happened?
And so sometimes I think it's like a rush of the setup, because sometimes what I've run into previously with different campaigns is sometimes marketing ops is the last to know when certain things are happening.
Yes,
And
I've heard that.
and so then it's a rush to get things set up and get it going and get it off the ground. And so then you're kind of testing after the fact once the campaign has gone live. And so, what I've learned with that is, making sure there's an open line of communication, as I mentioned before, with your demand gen team, with your campaigns team, to make sure you have an understanding of what's coming up. And so what we ended up doing at the last company that I was at is we actually ended up having weekly syncs with the demand gen team, so that we could be ahead of making sure we knew what was coming down the pipe for the next month, to make sure we had all of the programs set up and tested as we needed before, we ran into issues. And that actually ended up working well, and kind of builds that center of excellence mentality of, marketing ops is sometimes like an internal agency of their company if you're in-house. And so making sure that you're aligned with the different teams on what they're running and how you can help them run those campaigns smoothly and make sure everything's processing correctly, I think is really important for marketing ops and demand gen.
Yeah, you said some things that are really, I think, quite critical to point out, which is the alignment between demand gen and marketing ops, and having that proactive communication. I like the weekly sync idea a lot. I think, behind the weekly sync is really important to have sort of a planning process. I like a quarterly planning process myself. I think a monthly planning process is sort of too myopic. Weekly is certainly too myopic. But anything beyond, unless you're in a really large enterprise company, anything beyond quarterly is too far out. I like the cadence of a quarterly plan, at least from a demand gen perspective. And then having those weekly touch points on where are we to plan, what's coming up, how did we do with the activities that we just launched or executed? So that you have a closed loop sort of communication, and involving marketing ops in those communications is, as you say, critical for that center of excellence mentality. I love that point so much.
Yeah.
It's a great one.
I've worked across with different companies. My last company that I was in-house, we actually allowed certain members of the marketing team to be within our marketing automation platform, but with limited permissions. And so you kind of have to approach it differently. Some companies don't allow that at all. So it's only marketing ops. So that puts a lot more pressure on marketing ops. But with a structure where you actually have some marketing team members in your marketing automation platform, you can actually enable them a little bit more to kind of work with you and, teach them a little bit more about the tool, so that they are enabled to maybe set up their programs to a certain extent. And then marketing ops comes and kind of QAs the back end to make sure everything's working as expected. And so that actually gave me a better opportunity to work a lot closer with the campaigns team and the demand gen team at my last company, because we had Marketo office hours and things like that every week, so that we could kind of, they could learn they wanted to learn the tool, which is important to understand. But then I also got the help of having other people start the build, and then I would come in and make sure everything was set up correctly. So that was a good structure for that team as well.
Yeah, that's a great model. I know I started in demand gen way long ago when we had like a Salesforce admin, and I was running HubSpot, and I was marketing ops and demand gen all at the same time. I would say that the industry's come a long way. This marketing ops and sales ops and revenue ops sort of, conglomeration, at least in small companies, you might have one person serve as all of those things. As your company grows and scales out, then having specialized marketing ops and specialized sales ops, and it does make a lot of sense to have the different teams supporting the different teams and different initiatives. But I've set up a lot of campaigns in Salesforce myself, and linked them directly into HubSpot, which is what I'm most experienced in.
Yes.
So even having marketing ops is like such a gift.
Oh, totally.
From my perspective, to have someone that specializes in that and can take care of all that. So, any last stories or any last tips on, how demand generation marketers can work best with their marketing ops teams, or
I would,
from a marketing ops perspective, is there anything that you think we should know?
yeah, well, it's funny that you mentioned how you had the marketing ops experience, because I came in on the demand gen campaigns side, and it ended up
Yeah,
falling into marketing ops on accident. And so,
nice.
yeah. And so it's funny because I have that perspective of, how campaigns have to run, and, how you have to think of budget and planning and all of that sort of, those elements that go into marketing. And I think, making sure, as I've said, the lines of communication are open with your marketing ops team, but also making sure that you show that you actually, want to work together, and you kind of understand the process, and making sure that you understand what goes on kind of behind the scenes, in a way of just basic
Mhm.
understanding of the lead processing and how a lead routes and things like that, because that's why marketing ops sometimes has to tell people no, no, we can't do that right now, or no, we can't do that until next quarter, or things like that. And people don't understand why. And, it's all of these behind the scenes type projects that are going on, that we have to take into account. So just making sure that you're aligned and a friend of your marketing ops team and
Marketing
not an
ops
enemy.
and I would say aligned and proactively communicating with,
Yes.
right? I think
Right.
where we have run into problems in the past is either marketing ops not communicating changes or implementations or
Mm-hmm.
rollouts with demand gen, and demand gen not
Totally.
communicating we're launching these things. Um, so yeah, I think that communication and alignment is key. And I didn't realize that you had demand gen experience and before marketing ops, which I can already tell you makes for an excellent marketing ops person, right? Because you know your internal customer,
Mm-hmm.
you know what their pain points are, you know what their objectives are, you know what their goals are in their job, and you can help meet and serve them, which is a really insightful and critical perspective, I think, for all of us. I mean, we talk about our companies and their customers, right? But we
Mm-hmm.
rarely talk about our internal customers.
Right.
And I'm in demand gen marketing. My internal customer is my sales team
Mm-hmm.
and also my leadership team.
Right.
Those I, effectively report my outcomes to them. And I loved what you said about your demand gen internal as your internal customers, which is a great perspective.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
well, we now have come to the point in our podcast where we share recommended resources. And I know you've come a long way in your career. You've grown. You and I both share experience under our belts, but we know that we haven't gotten here by ourselves. It's taken, mentors and coworkers and our networks and our
Mm-hmm.
subject matter expertise and solving all these things. But I know that all of us carry around resources that have helped us either in our skill set, develop our skill sets further, and or help us in our professional development. So I'd love to hear from you what two resources, one or two or three resources that you have to share with the audience to help them as well.
Yeah. So one of my main resources that I follow along with is the MoPros Slack community. And so what it is it's a community of marketing operations professionals that, all of the major marketing automation platforms have their own channel. So, if you have a question about something going on with like a problem, or you can't figure something out, you just put a question in the channel, and someone will probably get back to you with an answer. And so that's been a godsend in a way in this marketing operations world, because there's such a wealth of knowledge with different people in the community. And so that's been a really important resource for me over the past few years. Also networking as well, because you get to know these people. I've never met most of them in person, but I feel like I know them. So that's
Yeah.
a really special, bond that we all have. And, some of the discussion in those channels is about, hey, my demand gen team is doing this. Like, has anyone done this before? Or have you ever integrated with this before? And things like that. And so it's also a way for us to learn about the different aspects of marketing that other companies are doing as well. And,
That's huge.
Yeah. And kind of network that way.
Yeah.
So that's a great community.
Yeah. What a valuable resource too. I think I didn't know it existed. So thank you. That's huge.
Yeah. And then another podcast that I like to follow in the revenue ops world is the Revenue Marketing Report, powered by Caliber Mind.
Nice.
Caliber Mind is a marketing attribution tool, and they have this really awesome podcast that they do that kind of goes through the different aspects of revenue marketing and what contributes to that. And it's a very valuable resource to kind of learn about the different pieces of the puzzle that kind of tie into revenue ops. So if you're definitely looking to learn more about that and how the different, aspects work, definitely recommend that podcast as well.
Yeah. You said the name of it again was?
The Revenue Marketing Report.
Okay, great. And I will link that in our show notes on our website as well so that others can find it. But yeah, I can't wait to listen. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
They may not like my new coffee mug that I just got, which, can you read that for the audience? It says it's a unicorn and it says marketing attribution is fake. We literally made it up.
That's hilarious. You know why that's hilarious is because I actually did an episode with them, and I said how people view marketing attribution as some unicorn that will fix everything. And so that mug is perfect.
I found this Sarah McNamara, who is, I believe, marketing ops at Slack,
she is.
Had this in her feed, and I bought it from there, and I laughed and giggled because as a marketing leader, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had about marketing attribution. And my ultimate perspective is I don't know why it matters. What matters is, are we hitting the number? Are we driving revenue? Are we building, sustainable pipeline? Those are the things that matter. All the back end, tricks. I mean,
this could lead us to a completely separate conversation, days long.
Yeah, I do understand ROI and campaign tracking and all of that, but I just don't. Sometimes leaders get lost in those details and lose sight of the big picture.
Definitely.
Right? And
yes, that's exactly what I've seen in the marketing attribution world, is that we're too focused on specific metrics, but that's a whole other topic. I could get lost in.
It's a whole other podcast. We'll have to have you back for that one. But anyway, it was so nice having you,
Anna. Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure. I wish you the best, and I love those resources. I'm so excited to share them with the audience. And anyway, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
Wonderful. Well, you take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have any questions, want to suggest topics, or have ideas for guest speakers, drop us a line at podcast@virtualintelligencebriefing.com. To learn more of our demand generation secrets, visit vibriefing.news or grab the link in our show notes.